Susan Wilson began writing Boston Sights and Insights as a column for the Globe in 1987 and published the first collection of these essays in 1994. Her latest, completely revised and updated version has just been released. She originally said about these essays that the intent of the columns was to observe Boston's rich past in a way that was both accessible to the general public and enlightening to serious students of history, and to encourage both Bostonians and Boston visitors to discover or rediscover the history around them. For years, Susan's guides have been the ones to go to if you want a real take on what the city is all about. From corpses, who migrated from one burying site to another, to the quirks of Fenway Park, to the African American Meeting House, Forest Hill Cemetery, and, of course, the Boston Athenaeum. Whether you want to know about museums or people or any mysterious alleyway, Susan Wilson's mind is the one to pick. Susan has undergraduate and graduate degrees from Tufts University, and her work has appeared in the Globe, Publishers Weekly, and many other publications. She was also instrumental in creating the literary trail of Greater Boston. She is a historian, a first-rate photographer, world traveler, dog lover, and she's a tremendous entertainer to boot. We've had some great times together, and I hope you will enjoy her company as much as I do. Please welcome Susan Wilson.
On my little thing here? You can hear that? Okay. Raise your hand if you're having any trouble hearing me at all. Anne, were you raising your hand? No. Oh, you're putting your glasses on. Okay. Okay. What I'd like to do is, because, as Anne said, a dog lover, I could have brought my dog today. Darn. Okay. Because I'm a photographer, I would like to, and because the book is illustrated with my photos, I'd very much like to show you images as I'm telling these stories. So if we could get the lights down, that would be absolutely fabulous. Okay? Also, I'd like to say that I get bored if I just talk by myself. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask them at any time, because I can see you. And also, if you don't do that, I'll be asking you questions anyway. This is completely interactive, okay? Can everyone see that okay? And it's kind of in focus? All right, excellent. And I think I know how to work this. All right, this is my book, Boston Sights and Insights. And we're liking to call it the 10th anniversary edition. The first one did come out in 1994, and people have asked me how long it took to write this book. Well, it kind of depends. If you count the years that I wrote a column called Sights and Insights in the Boston Globe, and then had to rewrite the entire thing for book format, the first version only took me 7 years to write, and the second version only took me another 10. So this is newly out as of this past month, and we really have significantly updated it. We've made lots of changes. Some of the chapters, we had 10% new information, some of them as much as 50 or 60% new information, because there have been so many changes over the years. So this is what the book looks like. What we've done is divided. There are 50 different chapters. Now, this is not like your conventional guidebook, where you might have one paragraph about 400 little things. This takes 50 specific sites in Boston and goes in depth into the stories, the people, the origins, and takes it all the way up to the modern day. So, including, everybody has a website now, which they didn't have 10 years ago. But we've divided these 50 chapters, all of which are 5 to 7 pages long, have a lot of content in them, into 6 different parts. You'll probably notice very soon that I love to write titles. I could spend my life writing titles. So this is Politics as Usual. The Freedom Trail and Beyond is the first section. And this maybe has some of the most predictable chapters. For example, the State House, the old State House, Faneuil Hall, the history of the Freedom Trail itself. The second section, From Here to Eternity, houses of worship and homes for the dead. Okay, this includes, of course, places like Trinity Church, but also the histories of various graveyards, including the Granary Burying Ground, one of the oldest in Boston, and Mount Auburn Cemetery, which was the first rural garden cemetery in America, and talks a lot about the evolution of cemeteries for art, for reflecting social values, etc. So that's the second section. The third, the Athens of America, Arts and Entertainment in Boston. And this includes some things that aren't always included in Histories of Boston. For example, Symphony Hall, the Colonial Theater, the Schubert Theater, and also places like Fenway Park, a very historic site. And one of my favorite chapters here is on the history of the Park Street MBTA stop. And some of you may know that we have the oldest subway in the United States, and there are many, many wonderful stories about this thing that happened in Boston, which was one of our many, many big digs when this was created. Way too many big digs. Athens, too, literary Boston. This is the section, of course, you want to read first because it includes the Boston Athenaeum, also the Boston Public Library, and perhaps some places that you wouldn't necessarily think about in regards to Boston literary history, such as the Omni Parker House. Does anyone know why I would include the Parker House in literary history? The Saturday Club. Oh, we've got a good crowd. One of the most famous literary groups in all of history. The Saturday Club met the last Saturday of every month for almost 5 decades, from the mid-1850s up through the 1890s. And you might find on some Saturday afternoon reading their pieces, talking to each other, drinking, eating, drinking. It was a very creative group. People like Longfellow and Whittier and Hawthorne and Emerson and Louis Agassiz and a variety of brilliant minds. Or if Charles Dickens came to town, he would come and visit them. So it was a phenomenal meeting place. Yes, there's a question back here already.
I hear that the Saturday Club still exists.
She hears that the Saturday Club still exists. Would anyone like to? No.
There's been talk about reviving the Saturday Club, but David Parker still has that on the planning phase. I don't believe that it's up to the public.
Thank you for that response. Okay.
There is a group which calls itself that, which periodically meets on Saturdays. It's the Somerset Club of Boston.
Right.
And I don't know how similar it is to the old group, but it does exist with that virtually same name.
Okay, so no one's trademarked the name and said you can't use it? Okay, all right. Okay, whoops, am I doing this wrong? Okay, here we go. All right. The Many Faces of Boston, this is kind of a catch-all section where I've put a lot of places and people that wouldn't necessarily be covered at all in many guidebooks. And this includes places like the African Meeting House, the oldest standing black church in America, the Abiel Smith School, the first school for black children in the United States, both of these on Beacon Hill, just down Joy Street. Things like the Women's Heritage Trail in Boston, the Black Heritage Trail, the Quincy School in Chinatown, which was a very, very revolutionary and radical school where a lot of the newest ideas in education were implemented back in the 1850s and 60s. So what I've tried to do is validate lesser-known places by giving them equal time as the better-known places. So this is one of my favorite sections. And then the last one, the Green, Green Grass of Home, which includes all kinds of parks, stories about Frederick Law Olmsted, covers the oldest public green in America, Boston Common, and the Public Garden, and goes all the way out to Franklin Park and gives you ideas about that. So it's pretty hefty. Now, one of the things that happened was when we first started this, we agreed that we would do 50 chapters because the book, as you'll see, is big, okay? It's like a little encyclopedia. And yet an encyclopedia that's fun to read. There's several different people approached me and said, can I be in the book this time? I hear that you're updating it. And I talked to my editor, and we went over and over and said, okay, you know what? We can't because it's already way, way too big. So we agreed that we would just keep the old chapters, but go back and find out all the things that had changed in those chapters over the years. And this, despite the fact, 2 of the chapters we could have easily added were one about Forest Hill Cemetery, because in the meantime, I wrote a book about it. And so that would have been an easy chapter, but we said, no, we've already got the granary in Mount Auburn, okay? So we didn't do that. And we also didn't do a chapter on the literary trail, which Anne mentioned is a book that I wrote in cooperation with the Boston History Collaborative, which is kind of a literary version of the Freedom Trail. So I do have chapters on the Boston Women's Heritage Trail, the Black Heritage Trail, and the Freedom Trail, but we didn't add this too. So that was great restraint. But you can still buy these books should you want to, okay? And do that. Now, this is interesting. Why do this book again? Okay, so this is the 10th anniversary edition. And the question is, why should I update it? And I was given the perfect opening line for this. I was at an historic site that shall go unnamed. And someone was speaking to a bunch of people who are wedding vendors, trying to talk them into using this place because it was a wonderful historic site. And many historic sites, let weddings happen there and do that as a sideline. And the woman who introduces the place came up and said, okay, this is the time where I'm supposed to tell you the history of this site. And she said, now I see some familiar faces here, so I want to tell you, I just hope you're not bored, because as I always say when I start these talks, history never changes. And I looked up and I went, what? And I thought that that would be the theme today of History Never Changes. I mean, was anyone in town yesterday? History never changes. Okay, so this was a great incentive. I've not talked to this woman about it, but I want to thank her for giving me a hook. Anyway, regarding history and not changing, looking up here, there are places. You certainly recognize many of the places up here. But for example, who is this person? Phyllis Wheatley. What are the changes about Phyllis Wheatley? First of all, how many of you know Phyllis Wheatley? Okay, hands down. How many of you studied about Phyllis Wheatley in social studies class or history class when you were a kid? English. Oh, that's good. Okay. Now, I don't know if you can see the crowd here, but virtually no hands went up. Okay? Phyllis Wheatley is very hip right now. And her hipness has actually grown in the past 10 years. For those who don't know her, she was the first published African-American black poet. I think I've got all the right adjectives there. She lived during the American Revolution. She was brought over here as a slave as a child, lived with the Wheatley family. In fact, her name, Phyllis Wheatley, they don't know her original name. Phyllis was the name of the ship she came over on, and Wheatley was the family that bought her. But it was discovered when she was very young that she loved to learn, she loved to read, she loved to write, and she became a profound intellect. Now, in the past 10 years, she has not only become a star in the classrooms, she has been depicted in statues all over Boston. This is in the Old South Meeting House in part of their Voices of Freedom displays. Okay, it's a beautiful display. They study her in the classroom when they're working there. She's also part of a trio of women who are now down on the Commonwealth Avenue Mall, where a new Boston Women's Memorial has been created, and she was one of 3 women, along with Abigail Adams and Lucy Stone, who are depicted there. And she's also, for any of you who have any relatives that are in the 5 to 8-year-old category, she's also a TV star, because there's this great PBS TV show called Liberty's Kids that's on each night at 5:30, and there are 10 historic characters that are the stars of this, and she's one of them. So all the 5-year-olds are Phyllis Wheatley, and she's really important. Oh, another thing, I think you all know the relatively new Landmarks Orchestra. They have now commissioned a piece to be written about Phyllis Wheatley for next summer. So she is very, very much, 10 years ago, she wasn't as big as she is today, and she's finally getting the credit due. So, an example. But let's go back to History Never Changes. This one's easy, okay? What is this, and what does this have to do with history changing? Anyone? Okay, everyone at once. Raise your hands, please. Yes?
Is that the change from Boston, possibly Black Bay, from where the waterway was built around
Exactly. It's actually a longer period than that. But if you look at the blue section, okay, this is the original outline of Boston in 1630, okay? And you look at the rest of the map, and that's all landfill. When Boston was founded in 1630 and set up, it was something like 783 acres. Today, just the downtown, okay, just this downtown area, not counting all the neighborhoods that were annexed later, we have more than tripled that land size. Now, this is easy for history changing, okay? This is very, very easy. By the way, I love showing this because sometimes newcomers to Boston just go Back Bay, Back Bay. That's a funny name for this area. And this is a wonderful way of seeing that the entire Back Bay was indeed a bay, okay? That the Charles River, before it was dammed, was a tidal river, that the tide, during high tide, came up and filled this entire area. And if you see here, Charles Street, you'll also see why Charles Street was named Charles Street, because the Charles River basically came up during high tide to that area. Okay, and here on this strip here, little Ben Franklin used to fish during high tide at the edge of the beach. So this is a perfect example of history changing in regards to land. But that's 300 years, that's easy. Okay, so let's go back to changes in the past 10 years. Phyllis Wheatley, we've already talked about. Big star today, wasn't as known 10 years ago, 30 years ago, very little known. And this, by the way, is one of her books that's on display. I assume there's a copy here, Anne? Yes, at least one copy, right? What's interesting is because there was so little belief in the abilities of African Americans to read or write or do what their white counterparts could do, that when this book came out, a council of ministers and John Hancock, a group of men got together and interrogated Phyllis Wheatley, asking her questions about the book and asking her literary things to prove that she'd written it, because they didn't believe that a black woman born as a slave could have had the ability to do this. After the interrogation, indeed, they said, it is true, she has written this, this is quite a phenomenon. So it was a pretty amazing thing. This is Bill Schofield, talking about a part of history. Bill Schofield passed away 5 years ago. I was very honored to have met him, photographed him, and interviewed him in his last month on Earth, actually. And this is the man that invented the Freedom Trail. Okay, the Freedom Trail, which is the oldest and most renowned of all the walking tours, probably in the world, and a lot of them have copied this, was begun in 1951. He was an editorial writer for the old Herald American. And he was talking with a guy named Bob Wynn, who worked over at the Old North Church. And they were having discussions about, well, you know, when my aunt comes to town, she visits the Paul Revere house, and then sometimes we go to the old State House. And they kept saying, but how couldn't we connect the dots? Isn't there some way that we could get people to visit all these sites? Because you can't, there's just no logic as to where they are and why they're around. So he kept writing about this and goading the city to connect the dots with a path. What's interesting is reading his old columns. He didn't use the word Freedom Trail. In fact, they used the terms Puritan Path and Freedom's Way at first. But within a short amount of time, it became the Freedom Trail. So even though Bill is gone now, the legacy he has left in the Freedom Trail is fairly amazing. This is one of the many, if you can't see through the scaffolding, this is one of the many renovations of Old Ironsides, USS Constitution. But just in the past 10 years, many of the major sites, including where we are here today, have undergone major renovations and improvements. So they're changing and yet remaining the same. Another individual I was honored to meet and interview, this is Sue Bailey Thurman. Is this out of focus? Oh, but that's better, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Sue Bailey Thurman is the mother of the Black Heritage Trail. And back in the 1960s, during the height of the civil rights movement, she was one of the people who began to try to think of some way to connect sites related to black heritage. And so even though it was many years later before it became formal, she is given the maternity aspect of this. And she has since left us also. However, the Black Heritage Trail is amazing. Does anyone know what this is depicting? 54th, yes. Right up the street. Okay, let's go up the street. There it is, okay, which many people still consider the finest piece of public art in all of Boston, rendered by Augustus St. Gaudens. And there we have in the, where's my pointer? Okay, we have in the center the white abolitionist, Robert Gould Shaw, surrounded by many of his men, the first all-free black regiment in the Union Army, who went and fought at Fort Wagner, and many of them died in that. However, like Phyllis Wheatley, it was a major turning point in understanding that blacks could fight alongside of whites, could fight as well as whites, and could be part of the army. This, by the way, for the 100th anniversary of the Shaw 54th, these are a group of reenactors. How many of you went to any of those festivities? Okay, in 1997. It was fun, right? Yeah. There were incredible. There was an encampment. They showed the movie Glory that was made about this. There were all kinds of seminars and forums. A book came out of it. And Colin Powell came and spoke in town and talked about how he was standing on the shoulders of these men and how they were the beginning of changes in the U.S. military and how he wouldn't have had his position today without what the 54th Regiment did. So these are celebrations that have just happened and new recognitions that have happened in the past 10 years. Another thing is also on the backside of Beacon Hill, the Abiel Smith School, which was offices up until fairly recently, has been renovated into a museum as part of the Museum of Afro-American History, and so shows what it was like in the first classroom in the United States, in the first school built specifically for black children. So these are part of the new displays there today. Anyone know who this is? Very good. Alma Lewis, who made major changes in the arts and integration and the rebuilding of Roxbury and Franklin Park. And for Franklin Park, I'm really sorry. This is the only picture I could find. But you get the idea, and it's somebody the other day when I showed this said, yeah, and it symbolizes integration. Anyway, Alma Lewis, who brought people like Duke Ellington and major acts into Franklin Park, making the world realize that it was a beautiful place to save, that we could get back together and make it the wonderful place that it used to be. Many people have forgotten that when Olmsted came and did his magic in creating the emerald necklace, that Franklin Park, he considered his gem. He considered the most beautiful part of the emerald necklace. And today it's finally, again, getting its due. Recognize this place? Okay. Before, after. Okay. The Athenaeum, having been in exile for 3 years, has returned in all its glory. We're in this wonderful place. If this were 6 years ago, I think we'd be perspiring right now, among other things. So you all know the wondrous things that have happened here. And again, history changes and becomes new. Does anyone know what this building is and what change happened here? Memorial Hall, and what happened? Exactly. Memorial Hall, which has Sanders Theater inside at Harvard, one of the most unusual buildings over at Harvard, either loved or hated by many, built as a memorial to Union soldiers who died in the Civil War. In 1956, the steeple blew off, and nobody replaced it. It was just there. And so it was only in the year 2000, okay, watch the top. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes. In 1956, it burned and was never replaced. I'm very sorry. And here's the new one to the tune of $4 million that finally went up in the year 2000. And so, again, bringing it back, it actually wasn't the original top. It was the second one designed. There was an 1874 and an 1878 design, and this was the 78. And it's truly beautiful and long overdue. But it's returned it to its wonderful historic self. This gentleman? Thoreau. Okay. What is this year? Anyone know? We're celebrating an anniversary. Okay, it's the 150th anniversary of Walden, of the publication of Walden. And there are all kinds of events, if you go onto the websites for the town of Concord, all kinds of events throughout the summer celebrating this. And what a lot of people have forgotten is that Thoreau, which is when you're in Concord, you're told to say it that way, not Thoreau, that this is from inside, sorry it's so dark there, inside one of the replicas of his small cabin that he lived on the edge of Walden Pond with. He's way more famous today than he was back in 1854 when Walden first came out. Anyway, there's a replica outside the Concord Museum, as well as there's one near the parking lot for wheelchair accessibility purposes over at Walden Pond. The actual site people walk out to, but they decided not to put a cabin there. Anyway, the thing about Thoreau is that he got his greatest popularity and greatest renown beginning this century in the 1960s and the 1970s with the environmental movement. So many of us, like myself, grew up thinking he was way more famous than he was at the time that he was actually writing these books. What change happened here recently that brought us back to the past in a wonderful way? Yes, exactly. I remember when first moving to Boston, hearing about the wonderful ice skating on the Frog Pond, and I wondered where it was. Well, in the past decade, this has again come back. And if you want a glorious time to go there, if any of you have ever gone there on first night, you not only have the ice skating, but the beautiful ice sculptures. So it's a wonderful return to the past with an eye to the present and the future. Okay, now, this is one of my favorites. What did she get that was overdue, and who is she? Another Composer, yes. Okay, Amy Beach, the first American woman to compose a symphony, lived in Boston. Her symphonies were the first symphonies written by a woman that the Boston Symphony Orchestra performed, also the Handel and Haydn Society. And she was a major, major player, but it's only in the past decade or so that her fame has been returned. She's being talked about, books are being written about her, she's being re-recorded. And one thing that a member of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail did, a woman named Leanne Curtis, was she fought to get her included with a bunch of guys. Okay? Because you all know the Hatch Shell, right? And the Hatch Shell on the Esplanade for years has had all these famous composers' names. 86 of them, but they're all what? Guys, okay? She became the 87th person through the prodding of Leanne Curtis and all kinds of writings, and for the grand celebration, Keith Lockhart came down, and a lot of people did, and she became the first woman's name, although she was very, very famous 100 years ago. But again, we're finally recognizing and understanding her importance. Okay, now we're at the quiz section, but we've already been quizzing all along, okay? So these are some of the stories, some things that have happened in the past decade that have new versions in my book. And I wanted to see, knowing this crowd, I think you'll know all the answers. Can anyone answer this? If one were to mention the Battle of Bunker Hill at the turn of the 21st century, to what might they be referring? Okay. Okay, so someone raise your hand. I hear all this mumbling, but I don't hear a sing. Yes. The bridge. Okay. What's the controversy, or what was the controversy of the bridge? Well, yes, it's got the world's longest name now. Yes, exactly. Okay. What I love about the Bunker Hill Monument is that it's always at the center of controversy. I mean, it's like, you know, people think of historic sites as being something you put a little glass bubble over, and there it is, and it's in the past. But this place, they're always arguing about it, and it's great, because it keeps, you know, conversation lively and freedom of speech. So just a few of the, just a quick review. Here we have the Battle of Bunker Hill, the John Trumbull painting. Joseph Warren being slain, our fabulous Joseph Warren. By the way, sometimes I give these talks and people go, Joseph Warren, I know the name, I'm not exactly sure who he was. Joseph Warren was probably a more important patriot and more feared by the British troops and the British generals than almost any other individual. He was a radical, but he happened to be killed at Bunker Hill, and therefore his name didn't live on like Paul Revere's and Sam Adams and John Hancock's, because he was killed at that time. And he was actually, that's a whole other story, but here's Joseph Warren. In the 50 years after Bunker Hill, the Battle of Bunker Hill, more streets, alleys, towns, cities, and counties were named after Warren than even after George Washington. He was that heralded and that remembered. Okay? So here's Joseph Warren. And, well, of course, the first controversy is probably that the Battle of Bunker Hill was fought on Breed's Hill. Okay, so that's an easy one. The second big controversy happened when they started building the monument many decades later, and as they were building it and selling off land and trying to fundraise, they ran out of money completely. Okay, and they didn't know how to finish this, and would this ever be completed, because there was no other source of money. How would we get from that to that? Well, one of the things that happened was this woman, Sarah Josepha Hale, renowned as the first American female editor. I'm always worried about first, but she's up there. She organized essentially what was called a ladies' bake sale. It was a large crafts bake sale, whatever, at the relatively new Quincy Marketplace. And what happened was she said, you know, the guys have done everything they could. We're not going to finish this monument. Maybe the ladies can step in. So with the power of the press, writing for women reading all over New England and the East Coast, she said, ladies, let's get together. Let's make cakes. Let's make crafts. Let's make quilts. Let's bring all these products here, see if we can earn some money. And with her help, this was a major portion of the money that completed the Bunker Hill Monument. What was interesting is a few years ago, a bunch of school kids from Boston went over to the Bunker Hill Monument with placards and signs and protesting, and this was covered by the media, and they were saying, it's not fair because nobody here tells the story of Sarah Josepha Hale and the ladies' bake sale. And after this protest happened, now when you go to Bunker Hill today, you hear about Sarah Josepha Hale and the ladies' bake sale that helped finish the Bunker Hill Monument. Okay, so again, a change in history, getting people due their credit. So here is the monument today, and here is the controversy. Okay, so the Zakim Bridge. And as we mentioned before, what happened was as they were building this and clearly using the monument as the prototype and reflecting that symbol, many people from Bunker Hill, or from that area, said, well, it should be called the Bunker Hill Bridge. And many other people said, well, let's name it for Leonard Zakim, who is whom? Anyone? Yes. The Anti-Defamation League, a gentleman who died, sadly, of cancer in his 40s at the prime of his life, and he was working for modern integration, for modern understanding, for modern tolerance. And so the people who were fighting for his name being on this said, well, this is a contemporary spin on that because this man was fighting for freedom today. And so there were certain people who said, well, he's Jewish. Why should we name Bunker Hill for a man who's Jewish because no Jews fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill? Okay, a flurry of historic research. Yes, indeed, Jews fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill, and one major Jewish philanthropist gave money towards the monument. Okay, so the ultimate compromise, the Bunker Hill Leonard P. Zakim Bridge today, the entire name. By the way, speaking of research, that was followed up by even more research about Bunker Hill, and this just came out last year, a study that found out that not only were there Jewish soldiers fighting on the colonist side, but that also something like 150 individuals, either African Americans or Native Americans, fought at Bunker Hill on the colonist side, so that our view of what happened and who was involved at that time has substantially changed just in the past few years. Okay, ready for the next question? Who was the perpetrator of the curse of the Bambino? Harry Frazee, good, excellent, okay. So, here's the story. We got you Fenway Park, okay? All right, the oldest single-deck stadium, baseball stadium in the United States, no longer tied for first place, okay? It opened in 1912. The only reason it wasn't headlines everywhere was the same week the Titanic sunk, okay? So, which kind of took precedence. Here he is, okay, in his Red Sox outfit, Babe Ruth, George Herman Ruth, looking svelter than we remember him, I think. And indeed, he did play, and what was his major role when he was with the Red Sox? Pitcher. You guys know everything. Okay, hold on. Okay, and you can see him there in the back. That's him in the back row, right? Yes. The Red Sox, who I've heard people say the Red Sox never won the World Series. Well, that's false. The Red Sox won the World Series in 1912. 1915, 1916, and 1918. Well, yeah, okay, we know that there's a nomenclature thing there. So anyway, but then, okay, in 1920, the gentleman who owned Fenway Park and the Red Sox at that time, Harry Frazee, an entertainment mogul who had his fingers in lots of projects, did indeed sell Babe Ruth, and yes, indeed, they've never won ever since. Now, as the story goes, okay, there's Harry on the left, and there's, I don't know, it's some Yankee management, but I've lost my notes about his name, but Harry's the important one. Now, as the legend has gone for years and years, and how it appeared in my last book, because this is the one that everyone told, Harry Frazee was in trouble with some of his other entertainment things. And according to the story that's been handed down for years, he needed money in particular for one Broadway show he was mounting called No, No, Nanette, and which he did indeed produce, and therefore sold Babe Ruth for the money to do that. Well, new research has been done in the past few years. There's some beautiful stories told in a book called Red Sox Century by Glenn Stout and Dick Johnson. Dick Johnson is the curator of the Sports Museum of New England. And they went back through Frazee's papers to try to find out what exactly was the truth here, and was this story true? And it turns out there was a lot of twist to it, and it's not as true as we thought. Number one, they went through his records, and he was not in financial trouble. He didn't need the money. He was fine at the time, so it wasn't a matter of being broke. Number two, they discovered that both the Red Sox and the Yankees were trying to do kind of a playing games with the head of the American League, a guy named Ban Johnson. Ban Johnson wanted to have complete control over all the teams and wanted everything to filter through him, whether it was a trade, a change, a purchase, whatever, and they wanted to do it without him. So one of the big deals in trading the Babe and other players was doing it without Ban Johnson's acknowledgement or without his permission. And so they were playing games underneath him. So that was number one. Number two was Babe Ruth, it wasn't as obvious back then that he was going to be the Babe Ruth that we know today. Okay, so for example, let me see if we've got a sec. Okay, that's allegedly a picture of him hitting his last home run. There's some question about that too, but there he is. He was a pitcher, primarily a pitcher, okay? He was not batting as well as we knew him to later. As a matter of fact, while Babe Ruth was with the Red Sox, of the 49 home runs that he hit, only 11 were in Fenway Park. He actually had trouble hitting in Fenway Park. So the question is, had he stayed with the Red Sox, would he have become the great batter that he did because he had trouble in Fenway? The other thing was, and I think some of you know about this, is that it was no day at the beach working with Babe Ruth, okay? He was a problem. There were times that Harry Frazee would know there was a big game the next day and go from barroom to barroom looking to find him and peel him off the floor and say, we have a game. And so he was a problem, and it was something he didn't want to put up with too much. And that combined with the fact that he was not spectacular at the time. Both of these were much more reasons for selling the Babe than anything to do with bankruptcy. So again, new stories, we've had to change it to alter the new research. Okay. I love this. Who was, but is no longer, banned at the BPL? Whoa. Raise your hand, stand up. Okay. Okay, I would like everyone to applaud. I've given this lecture more than a half a dozen times, and you're the first person to get it. Excellent, excellent. Well, okay. Well, I'm going to give you the whole story, okay? Who was banned at the BPL but is no longer banned at the BPL, and it's Frederick MacMonnie's statue of the Bacchantian infant fawn. And here's the story. This was the new McKim building. In 1895, the Boston Public Library, which actually had two previous homes, one on Mason Street and one where the Colonial Theater is today, they built this new thing on landfill in the Back Bay. Charles Follen McKim, the architect, was part of McKim, Mead & White, the prestigious New York firm. And it was a gorgeous building, an absolutely gorgeous building. And, okay, if you walk inside, okay, this is the staircase inside the McKim building. Right on the other side is the courtyard, right? Okay, so what happened was when McKim finished building it, he decided from his own money that he wanted to give a gift to the BPL. And he had been in Paris, seen this statue by Frederick MacMonnie's, fell in love with it. It's called the Bacchante with Infant Fawn, and he wanted it put in the courtyard, and he did, okay? Immediately, a controversy grew in Victorian Boston. First of all, she's dancing. She's way too happy, okay? Second of all, she's probably way too happy because what's in her hand? Grapes, okay? Wine, okay? And then, okay, to make it worse, the kid? Okay, so we've got a woman, and probably an intoxicated woman, drinking, trying to convince, corrupting the child, and chances are she was a strumpet as well. Wow, did they talk. Everyone weighed in on this. All the pulpits were talking about it. All the newspapers were talking about it. Some people took it really seriously. Some people were kidding around. The Boston Globe finally said, maybe you should put up something safer, like, say, a statue of a school teacher or a Sunday school teacher. It was very upsetting, and the controversy kept going and going and going. And finally, McKim said, the heck with it, I'm out of here. He took the statue, gave it to the Metropolitan Museum of New York, Museum of Art in New York, and the MFA in Boston made a copy of it, which has been there for many years. So, the McKim is having its, how are we on time? It's getting close, okay. Speed her up. Okay. If you go there today, she's back. Okay, so part of the goal of the Boston Public Library for their 100th anniversary on that site and all the wonderful renovations that have happened there in the past few years was to get her back. They couldn't get the original, no way. They couldn't get the one from the MFA, so they have a recasting. But indeed, should you go back there today, it is just as McKim wanted it to be, and the Bacchanti with Infant Fawn is back in the center in a beautiful courtyard. Okay, so we're going to do these last questions quite fast. Why is Boston's public garden indebted to Wagner's Lohengrin? Oh, and next question. We can just whip through this. Okay. All right. You guys know all this stuff. Okay. A view showing some of the very first landfill. This was a drawing taken from the Arlington Street Church, the view of the public garden. Sorry, I'm trying to, I keep pointing this in the wrong way for that. Okay. And there's the lagoon. So the basic story was, after the public garden, which was the first of the landfill area gardens to go in, after it was built, and here's a view today with the swan boats in the background and the beautiful little bridge, okay, a gentleman named Robert Paget, who was an English immigrant and a boat builder, got the concession to do rowboats there in the lagoon in the public garden. And I was lucky the day I was photographing this to find a rowboat there. But he said, you know, this isn't quite interesting enough. Rowboats, okay, fine, but I want something very distinctive. So there are two things that influenced him. Number one is that in the 1870s, when this happened, 1877, it was at the height of the newfound height of the popularity of the bicycle in Boston. The bicycle was a relatively new thing, and this actually is from a little bit later from Pope Manufacturing, who was one of the biggest bicycle makers in the world, was right here in Boston. But people had a mania for bicycles. Now, what's that got to do with the swan boats? Yeah, those jocks that pedal them, you know, those, okay, the entire mechanism is based on the bicycle. So that was one idea that went through Paget's mind. And then the second one was he saw Wagner's Lohengrin. I was going to say he listened to this CD. It's the only picture I could get that had all of it. Okay. And then, of course, the story here in Wagner's Lohengrin is a knight of the Holy Grail grabs onto a swan who takes him across the lake so he can save the innocence of his lady, whatever. Anyway, swan, transportation, whatever, bicycles, you've got it. And so this became the prototype of the swan boats. Interestingly enough, some people think that the swan boats belong to the city of Boston, that it's a Boston concession, but the Paget family still runs it. It's a private, family-run group. And Paul Paget and his daughter Lynn are the ones that you often see down there. So, this, by the way, on the centennial, Boston Ballet performed Swan Lake on the swan boats. This is a postcard that I found in a flea market. Okay, quickly, what does a woman have to do to become memorialized in a public art monument in Boston? Wait a couple hundred years. Good. Anyone else? Be hanged? Yeah? We're on the right road. Okay. Okay. Basically, up until a few years ago, the answer was very simple. You either had to be banished or hanged. Okay? And the only two women memorialized in public art in Boston were Anne Hutchinson and Mary Dyer, and both of these people from the 1600s, and both banished for their very radical views, i.e. being a woman who thought. And however, today this has changed, and today you need to be a wonderful person, of course, but you just need like $500,000 and every organization in town working their little tushes off for 10 years, and you finally will have something new like this, the Boston Women's Memorial. If you've not seen it, please go down. It's on the Fairfield Gloucester block and just made its debut in October. On the left, Lucy Stone. In the middle, Abigail Adams. And again, Phyllis Wheatley on the right. So a variety of organizations pushed and prodded. And people have asked why there were three people. Well, if you've got this so many years of deprivation, how are you going to choose one person? So it was very difficult. A lot of discussion went into who would be depicted here and how. Very relevant that the artist Meredith Bergman chose to put them off their pedestals instead of on their pedestals. Okay? And it is wonderful to see kids go by and actually touch and feel their hands, because all these women were writers of different ways. Okay, last one, really, really quickly. How many lanterns did Paul Revere hang in the steeple of the Old North Church? Man, I'm out of here. You're right. It was none. It was none. Now, for people who don't think it through and aren't brilliant like you all are, what would you think the answer would be? 2. Okay, right? 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, on the opposite shore will be. Okay, here's Paul Revere shown the way he liked to be instead of a rich industrialist, which he became, as the simple silversmith or goldsmith. Here is the Old North Church where the 2 lanterns were hanged. And of course, not hanged, that's hung. Woo! Okay, anyway, and there's one of the lanterns. By the way, the Concord Museum to this day has what they believe is one of the original lanterns, and the Old North has been trying to get it from them for years now. If anyone has a connection, if you could get it back to the Old North, it'd be great. Anyway, so the signal was actually not done by Paul Revere because he was busy getting ready to take a rowboat across the Charles, get onto Deacon Larkin's horse and ride out to the countryside with dozens of other people. Okay, and it was either Robert Newman or, depending on whose side you're on, a guy named John Pulling who actually put the lanterns up there. Now, 2 if by sea, what sea is around here? The Charles River, yeah. Remember that tide we talked about in the beginning? High tide, the British were camped out on Boston Common, and if they were going to go out to Lexington and Concord, where they thought the colonists were storing all kinds of arms that would enable them to fight them, okay, they would have to sneak out in the night. But it would be really great if they waited till high tide, till the Charles River was up to where the Charles Street is today, put their boats in a night, went across to Cambridge, and then marched over. That would be much faster than going all the way down modern Washington Street, through Roxbury, up, whatever. So that's why the 2 lanterns were hung, but not by Paul Revere. What's interesting now is that I think all of you know, in fact, I know all of you know because you know everything, is that Mr. Longfellow here at his home in Cambridge was Paul Revere's primary PR man. And that if you asked people about Paul Revere in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, they knew him primarily as a great industrialist and a copper magnate, okay? And it was because his name rhymed so easily and was chosen by Longfellow that many people for years have given Paul Revere the credit for being the lone writer, which of course we now know he wasn't by a long shot. And here is and yet another picture of Longfellow. By the way, if you haven't been over to the Longfellow house recently, the renovations are marvelous. And they've just finished redoing the historic gardens. They're opening officially, I think, June 6th. So get over it. It's just another wonderful renovation. And here's Mr. Revere on his horse, on his pedestal. Interesting. Okay. And what is really neat now is that at the Old North, because people are afraid, well, if they find out Longfellow's poem was really an exaggeration, he wasn't the lone writer, he didn't hang the lanterns, all this stuff, are people going to be disappointed? But instead what they're doing is teaching why Longfellow wrote the poem and the importance of it. And one major reason, because the poem came out in 1861, okay, in the Atlantic, was that Longfellow was trying to show, it was the beginning of the Civil War, that the work of one man, one individual, could turn the tide of a war, and encouraging people to join the Union Army and to fight for the Union cause. So we're learning about a whole different aspect, why the poem was written and how it was used in the 1860s, rather than all the inaccuracies from 1775. So these are just some of the changes, some of the ways history has changed, and some of the stories you'll find in Sights and Insights. The rest you're going to have to buy the book. Sure.
I think have time for a few questions, and then if you want to go out and buy our book, we just have.
I'll be in the back signing. Any questions from you guys here? If not, I'll talk to you back there. Questions?
You have questions?
Yes. This building was built in 1849, and thank you. The question was, this building of the Athenaeum, when was it built, and was it the original building? No, it was not the original building. They started out actually near the King's Chapel.
Then went down to Pearl Street.
Then to Pearl Street, And then this marvelous entity was built in 1849 and changed many times. They used to have this wonderful grand staircase, but it took up too much stack room, right? Yeah, okay. Other questions? Yes?
How did you get started on doing all of this since you are a photographer?
Because all my degrees were in history. And somebody said, why don't you use them? Nice to see you. Yes?
What's the origin of the word Athenaeum?
An Athenaeum is from a Greek word meaning a place of learning, study. From Athens and Athena. And Athena, intellect, wisdom. Well, they're all Greek. They're all Greek to us. I'm sorry. From Athena and Athenaeum being a word meaning a place of learning. Arts, but also encompassing science and intellect, whatever. And one of the interesting things that I'm sure many of you know is that the Athenaeum, this Athenaeum, was, it's phenomenal today, but it was the art museum in Boston and gave many of the things that enabled the MFA, including money, finance, support, and actual art objects, to their opening in 1876. And this was also the library. In 1850, this was one of the two largest libraries in America. The other one was the Library of Congress. So there are many things that people have forgotten about the wonders of this place, which continue to evolve. That'll cost you. Okay, yes?
You cover the Metropolitan, the Wang Center, the Metropolitan?
Unfortunately, the Wang, it's mentioned in there, but because we originally cut off at 50 chapters, it was very hard. So it's mentioned in that section, but the only downtown stages covered are Symphony Hall, Colonial Theater, Schubert Theater. Were I to expand it, I would love to do that. It's mentioned as being, a wonderful large movie palace. And yes. Okay, the question was, did I cover the Metropolitan movie theater, which is now the Wang Center for the Arts, and was the music hall before that, etc. And unfortunately, it didn't, because we had to stop this book somewhere. That would have been one of the first 5 that I would have included if we could expand it, or if we get the finances to do volume 2. It's definitely going to be in there, but I'm sad that it's not in there. No. Yes? That would be you, yes. Okay.
I may have misunderstood you completely, and if I did, please excuse me, but I thought you said something like, you weren't quite sure who General Joseph Warren was. Maybe I misunderstood.
No. I said that he has not been given his due, and many people don't consider him a household name today, whereas they did in the 1770s, 80s, 90s, even the 5 decades after that, and that many school kids know Revere and Hancock and Sam Adams, and he should be as famous, if not more famous. Yes?
If you look over, I'm sure you've seen, he was a surgeon. He was like, in the Battle of Bunker Hill, because he operated to save so many other people. But the Warrens, a great family of doctors.
Yes.
And if you go over to the Mass General Hospital, in the Warren building, the 9 generations of Warrens were doctors. They're all lineals of General Joseph Warren.
Right.
One thing I figured out, there's so many doctors, great record specialists, Dr. Paul W. White is probably a descendant because of his obituary. His brother, as you said, his brother is still living at that time as a dentist, and his name, his brother's Dr. White's brother's name is Joseph Warren White.
Wow, that's great. And also should you pick up my book on the history of Forest Hill Cemetery, it's got a whole section because there is a Mount Warren, and all of those doctors and Joseph Warren are now buried there. And also, where's the gentleman I was speaking to before who was writing about dental history? Okay, it was one of the doctors in the Warren family, who during the first use of ether in the ether dome over at Mass General, he was the person who actually did the surgery in 1846. Okay? Yes, question? Okay, yes, Fort Warren on George's Island. In fact, there is a chapter on George's Island and Fort Warren, and one of my favorite ghosts, the Lady in Black, in here. And yes, it was named after Joseph Warren. Right, because the Warren home was in West Roxbury, and that statue has been in a lot of different places. The Joseph Warren statue has done quite a bit of moving about at Roxbury Latin, whatever. That's a whole other story. I'm supposed to only take one more question because I have to get out there. Is there one more question? Yes?
What's your break even to start on book 2? How many books do we have to buy?
Oh, if you could each buy 10 today, that would be very helpful. And I promise to sign them all. Okay? Thank you very much.